G'day guys, Dean from Blog for the Blood God here, and today I want to talk to you about a philosophy that I like to take with me to competitive Warhammer 40k events called Read When Paired. This is a way that you can get much better results and much more enjoyment out of your Warhammer 40k tournaments. So with that being said, let's jump straight into the video.
Blog for the Blood God.
G'day guys! Today I wanted to talk to you a little bit about a personal philosophy of mine that I bring with me to Warhammer 40k tournaments that I think does a couple of things. One, it actually helps increase my results and improve the way that I perform on the tabletop, but it also just generally helps my enjoyment of the event, both pre-event, post-event, and during the event. So there's a lot going on with this little philosophy, and yeah, I just wanted to sort of share that with you guys and get your thoughts and see if you guys adopt a similar sort of mentality when you're approaching events and the way you look at the events and those sorts of things. I call it Read When Paired. Now, the origins of this come from the way that you approach analyzing the meta and the way that you approach analyzing people's lists. So there's a lot of people out there, and what they'll do is as soon as the lists go public for an event, which is normally a week, a couple of days before the event sometimes, the tournament organizer will release all the lists, and they'll go through all those lists and they'll analyze what people are bringing. And this is after your list has obviously been submitted, so you can't make any changes at this stage, but people will go through all of the lists at the event and they'll analyze those lists and they'll dig into them and they'll look up all their strats and they'll look up all of their stuff and they'll try to come up with a game plan and they'll think about different ways that they can beat all of these different lists. And then people do this to varying degrees. Sometimes they'll look through everybody's lists, depending on the size of the event, of course. Other times, if it's a larger event, they'll just look at key players. They'll look at the top tier players or the people that they regularly verse or that sort of thing. They'll look at those people's lists and then they'll get out the codexes and they'll do their research and they do this essentially thinking that what they're doing is they're gaining an advantage because they're going in with more information and they're learning a lot and they're preparing and they're coming up with strategies in advance that they can then deploy during the game. And this does have a lot of benefits, right? And then another thing that people will do is they'll do the research, they'll learn the relevant lists, they'll prep, they'll come up with their strategies, and then throughout the tournament they will obsessively check the placings, check the standings to see who's performing well, who's underperforming, who's within the same sort of bracket or the same range as them, so who their likely opponents are going to be. And then they'll sort of try and make plans and try and make decisions based off, well, who am I likely to verse? It could be either that guard player or it could be this Chaos Demons player. So they'll start thinking about those two matchups and they'll start putting a lot of prep work into those two matchups. And then that means that tomorrow when turns out they're versing one of those two players, it's kind of like they've already spent an hour or two planning the matchup. So that gives them an advantage going into it compared to their opponent who may have spent no time planning, right? So that's the theory that a lot of people adopt at tournaments, and my philosophy is actually the inverse of that. And I call it Read When Paired. And basically that means I might thumb through to find similar lists to mine, like people running the same faction, out of morbid curiosity, if anything. But I don't really dig through what are all the top players running, and I don't really spend much time thinking about other people's lists. I just go, cool, oh, the lists are public, are they? Cool, I don't care, right? I know what I'm running. I know what my list is. I don't care what everybody else's lists are. I'll figure it out when I get paired into them. And then throughout the day, I don't spend a lot of time looking at the placings and the standings and who's performing well and who's not and who's in my bracket. I don't spend a lot of time doing that. I just sort of do my thing, And this is actually an intentional strategy. So it's a combination of laziness and an intentional strategy. But basically what I do is I'll read their list when I'm paired into them. That's when I'll read the list. I won't be stressing about who I might verse and who's the potential options and then staying up late thinking about it and all that sort of stuff. I just go, cool, I've been paired, who am I into? Once I know who I'm into, I'll then start the process of coming up with a game plan. But I don't put a lot of prep work into it. And you may be thinking this sounds dumb, like this puts you at a significant disadvantage because you haven't put in the prep work. But what it actually does, in my opinion, is after you've been doing it like this for a while, it actually trains you to adapt rapidly, and it trains you to sort of come up with a robust game plan on the fly. And it also trains you to trust your rapid game plan and trust that strategy that you've came up with on the fly, which is, I think, a lot of the time people get caught up when they overanalyze things and they put too much emphasis on coming up with a game plan to the point where they actually come up with too many potential game plans. Like, I could do this, or I could do that. Oh, but what if he does that? So then I might have to do this. And then they go around and around in circles and they come up with 50 different options. And then they get analysis paralysis when it comes to the table. And then they don't have the confidence to select one of those many game plans that they've come up with. And therefore they don't execute them. Or they'll execute half of one and then the other half of another. Or, like they might say, oh, all I need to do to win that matchup is defend my home and contest the center. That might be their original plan. But then they might also be like, oh, well, actually, there is an option where I could take their home objective and then contest the center and then invert the thing. And then as a result, they have these two competing game plans in their mind. And then when they go to the tabletop, instead of committing to one and then just executing it well, they actually modulate between the two. And as a result, they end up not really holding their home or taking their opponent's home. And because they're only really contesting the center, they don't really end up doing any of those three things well. And as a result, they lose the game. So, whereas if you just look at the table, you look at the mission, and that's another part of this, is that when you're analyzing somebody's list, it can be really hard to know what the game plan is going to be because you don't know what mission you're going to play them on, If it's a couple of days before the event and you look at someone's list and you're like, oh, this is a real scary list, I'm a scary player, he's somebody that does really well, I'm very likely going to have to verse him at some stage if I want to win the event. So what's his list do? What do I need to worry about? If you do that, you're going to come up with all these game plans, but they don't necessarily apply to every mission. The way that you verse somebody on Data Scry Salvage is very different than the way you would verse that same list on, Abandoned Sanctuaries. So, coming up with the plan that far in advance with that little information, it's not necessarily useful planning, It's like trying to plan something that you're going to do on the weekend, but in, 20 weeks from now. And it's like, you don't know what the weather's going to be like. You don't know what events are going to be on. You don't know what your family and friends are going to be doing that weekend. So trying to plan it now doesn't necessarily make a lot of sense, So, yeah, that's why I adopt the strategy of read when paired, where it's like, cool, I know what the mission is for this round. Once I know what my opponent's going to be, I will then come up with a game plan. And I often come up with a generic game plan for the mission in advance, because that's not going to change. And then I just adapt that game plan to whatever my opponent has. So it might be like Data Scry Salvage. My general game plan that I've been using with my Black Legion is to go, cool, the Terminators go with the Sorcerer, the Dark Apostle, and the Master of Possessions. They go claim one objective, and then Abaddon and the Venom Crawler and the Decimators and the Hellbrutes, they go claim the other two. There's the four along the center there in Data Scry Salvage. They go claim those. The Cultists will stay home and control my home objective, and then I'll just take those four central objectives and fight over them. I don't care if my opponent takes my home objective. If I'm controlling all 4 objective markers in the center of the table, then I'm in a pretty commanding position. Is my general approach to Data Scry salvage. Because it's a lot easier to get hold more when you have the ability to control 4 objective markers, and the Terminator unit can very easily stretch out over 2, and then Abaddon and the Hellbrutes and all that sort of stuff, they're pretty effective at controlling the other 2. So that's an example of a general game plan. But then if I go up against somebody who's, they might have specific tools in their list, and then looking at the terrain layout, there might not be anywhere specific that I can hide on one of those flanks. I might then switch up my game plan and go, well, actually what I'm going to do is I'm going to throw the Terminators at those 2. I'm going to keep the Decimators and the Hellbrutes with the Cultists to control my home, and I'm going to try to control those 3 objectives all game. And then I might throw Abaddon out as well into the, towards my opponent's home. Or I might use the Veilbreaker plate to throw my Terminators at their home objective, and then use Abaddon and the others to control the flank, and the Cultists to control my home, and go for those 4 objectives. So I come up with a general sort of game plan, but then I'll adapt it based on my opponent. Instead of trying to come up with a game plan for 50 different opponents, which is 50 different game plans, and then adapting that game plan to the mission, I find that's way harder to do, because you end up with more variables, more different options. So I just go with the read when paired, which is just wait until you're paired into them, pull up their list. One of the other really good things that this trains you is it trains you how to ask good questions. I've done a couple of videos on this, so I'll chuck links to them in the description below, but I believe one of the biggest strengths that you can develop as a player, that anybody can develop, and there's literally no barrier for entry to this, is learning how to ask good questions. Learning to know to ask your opponent, do you have any ability to, reposition or redeploy units, after the first battle round begins? Like, is it redeploys? Is it teleportation? Is it, pre-game moves? Any of that sort of stuff. Knowing to ask that question, knowing to ask your opponent what their threat ranges are, knowing to ask your opponent if they have any abilities to heroically intervene. All of those sorts of things are really, really good questions. And if you learn what questions to ask and when, and develop that skill, well, then you actually don't need to read their lists in advance, because your opponent will give you all of the information you need. So you don't need to read their list in advance and try to stress out and come up with game plans. And I find that a lot of the time when I see people do this, they do stress out about it. Or it might not even be stress out, but they dedicate considerable mental resources to solving a problem that they may never face. If you're going through and analyzing all of the top players' lists, well, what's the chances that you're going to verse all of them? Very slim, right? Generally, you're only going to have to, even if they all perform really, really well, and so do you, you're still only likely going to have to verse 2 of them, 1 or 2 of them, and there might be 10 plus top players at an event, or considered players you consider top players, depending on sort of where you put yourself in that pecking order, but there may only be 10 players at that event that are at your caliber that you need to worry about, but you're probably only going to verse 1 or 2 of them. And so as a result, if you go and analyze all 10 of those lists and lose sleep over coming up with their game plan against them, then you really are wasting your mental resources. And what I like to do is I'll go out for dinner with a bunch of people, before and during the event, like on a Saturday night, and if we go up Friday or whatever, we'll go out for dinner in advance. And just have some drinks, talk shit, go back to the Airbnb that we're staying at, or hotel or whatever, talk some more shit there, have some laughs, go to sleep. I don't want to be staying up stressing about, who am I going to verse, and what are the results going to be, and how are we going to do this, and what's my game plan going to be. And it's like I'm stressing about this thing that's probably not going to happen. I would much rather spend that time just having fun, and the same goes for during the event. I don't want to spend time during the event stressing over the placings and who am I likely to verse and all of that. because that just puts undue pressure. It saps the fun out of the event. It makes them less enjoyable. Whereas if you just go into the event just like, relaxed and chilled and just thinking, oh, I'm just here to have fun and it's all good, I'll just figure it out when I get there. I'll cross that bridge when I get there. That's a way, way better approach to the event, in my opinion, and in my experience. In my early days, I did, analyze lists and stress over that and try to figure out what's the best game plan. I'd ask my mates who were better players than me. I'd be like, what do you do in this situation? How would you go about beating this? But, these days, not so much. The only exception to that will be like if I've got a considerable drive to an event or something like that, and I've got mates with me in the car. But even then, generally what I'll do is they'll ask me questions like, oh, we've got this list run by, XYZ, a player, and then they'll talk about how they would go about beating it. And they'd ask me questions about what I think about what their plans are and those sorts of things. But and then if they ask me how would you go about beating it with your list, I'll then say, oh, well, I guess I would do this, that, and whatever. But yeah, I generally think that over-analyzing those sorts of things, the lists in a meta at an event, is going to be detrimental because you're going to be wasting your resources and you're going to be working yourself up over something that's probably not going to happen. And that's sort of just where I sit on it. And the reason that I call this it's a philosophy of mine as opposed to a strategy or a tactic, the reason I call it a philosophy is because you can actually apply this read when paired mentality to other areas of life. Like, you might get really upset about something that's happening geopolitically, like, it might be a particular war that's happening right now, and you're getting really worked up about it because you are passionate about one of the other sides. And it's like, I sort of look at that and I'm like, yeah, but there's nothing I can do about it. It's entirely likely that I'm not going to get involved in it, and I'm not helping myself or anyone else by stressing out about this war. I would just read when paired, and that means just take your current situation and do what you can with it, and when that situation changes, understand this new situation and then come up with a game plan then. Don't stress about the infinite possible situations you could end up in and what you need to do in those situations. Don't try not to think too much about the future and focus on the now, and focus on what you can do in the current situation to do what you want to do, to achieve your desired result. So it works on that front. It works on, on all kinds of different fronts in life. And I genuinely do believe that approaching life with this philosophy in mind, it actually does, it increases your enjoyment of life. It makes you more effective at coming up with those situational game plans. I'm not suggesting you look at everything in life as a game. There's some things in life that are not a game and that you probably should take a little bit more seriously. But generally speaking, if you just look at everything in life as instances of decision making, because that's effectively all life is, it's just making decisions that impact future decisions that then cause you to make decisions that impact other future decisions. Like, that's what everything in life is. Where do you want to work? What do you want to do? How do you want to do it? All of these things. But instead of stressing about all of the future ramifications of each decision, if you just go, all possible future decisions that might force you to then make, I just think about my current situation. What do I currently think is the best thing to do based on my core sort of principles, and then I just make that decision. And then in the future, life will throw curveballs at you, and you just take them on board and make the decisions there. It's kind of a spin on Stoicism. Like, Stoicism is basically saying, don't stress about things that you would perceive as mistakes or problems in your life, because you never truly know the results of those problems. So the example that's often used in Stoicism is, imagine there's this job that you really, really want, and it's your dream job, and it's all these things. So you apply for the job and then you don't get the job, right? You might look at that situation and be sad and be like, this sucks, I didn't get the job I wanted. But little did you know that then meant you took a different job, and at that different job you met the woman that you fell in love with and ended up becoming your wife, and you ended up starting a family with her. And it's like, if you had got that first dream job, you would have never met her, and then your life would have been worse had you got the thing that at the time you thought was your dream, So the lesson to take from that is, when you don't get the job that you want, you just sort of go, oh, okay, cool. Oh, well, I guess I didn't get it, but that's fine, because I don't know whether or not that was going to be a good or a bad thing anyway, because you just you can't possibly know the consequences of every situation. There's so many consequences that you couldn't possibly predict, that trying to predict them all and then weigh up whether or not it's a good or a bad thing that this event has taken place is really, really hard to do. So Stoicism is advised that basically it's advising to read when paired. It's advising that you just go, cool, well, that situation was what it was. What's my next situation, and how am I going to go about tackling that, and what's going to happen there? Take each situation on face value as it arises. Don't stress about the past or the future, or at least stress about the past and the future as little as possible. We're all humans, we all stress about things, but try to do it as little as possible, and then that will put you in a more positive, more creative, more open mindset. And then that creative, positive, and open mindset will generate you much better results going forward, and it will help you achieve your goals much quicker than if you go in it with a pessimistic or negative or closed mindset. So yeah, that's what I wanted to share with you guys today. It's a little bit of a different topic than our other videos, where we talk about the specifics of the meta, or the specifics of lists, or the specifics of combos. I just wanted to sort of mix it up a little bit, get a little philosophical on you. So let me know if you enjoyed this content. If you did, check out blogforthebloodgod.com. That's a great place where you can show your support for the channel. You can pick up some merchandise. We've got dice, we've got neoprene objective markers, we've got t-shirts and other apparel. We've got neoprene gaming mats now, unique Blog for the Blood God branded gaming mats. We've got all kinds of sick stuff over on that website. So if you want to check it out, go over to blogforthebloodgod.com. You can also, through that website, you can join our Patreon and our Discord community. We've got a ripper of a little community over there where we talk tactics and strategy. I help people write their lists and coach people through that. We do a lot of good work over in that Discord community. So if that's something you're interested in, check that out as well. And I will see you in the next video. Thanks for tuning in, guys. And yeah, I'll see you around. Cheers. Alrighty, guys, I hope you enjoyed that video. If you did, make sure to like, subscribe, all that good shit. Check out blogforthebloodgod.com if you want to show your support for the channel. You can join our Patreon over there, where we have unique member benefits. We have a Discord server. We have apparel like the shirt I'm wearing now. We've got neoprene objective markers. We've got gaming mats. We've got dice. We've got all kinds of really cool ways that you can show your support for the channel over on blogforthebloodgod.com. So if you enjoyed this video, check that out. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.
Blog for the Blood God.
The Warhammer community suffers from some of the most prohibitively expensive essentials in the world, especially Australian content creators. Every single day, Dean wants to create content, but he can't. Suffering from old, worn-out brushes, expensive model kits, and costly software and equipment he can't endure much longer. Just look at this dirty paint water. Would you drink this? Would you let your child? Even a small monthly donation can help provide Dean with clean paint water, basic tools for survival, and access to life-saving information and education. So please, follow the links in the description below and find out how you can sponsor a mad cunt like Dean today and end the suffering. Suffering that is cruel, unsustainable,